I think if there's one thing both the British and the American governments can agree on with the state visit is that neither of them want to talk about the resignation of Mandelson and the implication that the intertwining of that with the Epstein issue for President Trump domestically. I think both sides are looking to move on from that and not speak about it. I imagine journalists will bring it up. The obvious key variable there will be whether or not President Trump engages and how. In my view, I don't think he's going to want to engage with it, and I don't think either will Prime Minister Starmer. So I think it'll be something that comes up, but there's always going to be that potential for embarrassment. But I think both sides are going to be trying to move on from it.
Now, when President Trump addressed the honoured guests at the long glittering table at Windsor Castle tonight, for once he avoided controversy, describing his second state visit to the UK as one of the greatest honours of his life.
Together we've done more good for humanity than any two countries in all of history. Together we must defend the exceptional heritage that makes us who we are, and we must continue to stand for the values and the people of the English-speaking world, and we do indeed stand for that. On behalf of all Americans, I offer a toast to one of the great friendships, to two great countries, and to His Majesty King Charles III, a very, very special man, and also a very, very special queen. Thank you very much.
But tomorrow, the politics takes over from the pageantry when the president sits down at Chequers with Sir Keir Starmer, getting down to the serious discussions of the president's trip. Will that go as smoothly as today? Well, let's talk to Michael Martins, former political and economic specialist at the US Embassy in the UK during President Trump's first term. Good evening to you, Michael.
Good evening, Carol. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, and delighted to have you with us. I mean, just first of all, a reflection on that occasion tonight. Clearly, both the King and the President are really speaking in such glowing terms about the importance of the special relationship and the bond between our two countries.
Yeah, I mean, based on my time at the American Embassy in London, I had. It's rare to find two governments that work as closely together that have such a strong and deep bond, especially at the working level. Like, I've been asked a few times during the past few days of like how does this demonstrate itself? And I think the visit over the past week, over the past few days and the coming days shows that these two countries, these two governments can come together in the course of a few months and put together a state visit of this scale that is fit for the president.
Yeah, and we know that for President Trump, I mean, he said that this was one of the main things he was coming here for, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think he's been very clear about how happy he is to be invited for the second state visit, the unprecedented nature of it. I think it's also clear that he likes the idea of going to the castle and doing a state banquet and all of it. Like all of this stuff, in the first visit made him very, very happy, and I can only imagine how delighted he is for the second go around.
And of course, tomorrow he sits down at Chequers with the Prime Minister, and then the two leaders will take questions from the media. I mean, it's there that some of the difficulties in this special relationship will be exposed, isn't it? And we're hearing tonight, for example, that the Prime Minister is going to go ahead and recognise a state of Palestine almost as soon as the President leaves.
Yeah, I think on the Israel-Gaza conflict, I think there is daylight between the US and the UK in terms of their foreign policy positioning. I also think the UK, Starmer has not been unclear that he intends to do that. I think the fact that this is happening after the president leaves, it is indicative of, something that maybe potentially was something he didn't necessarily want to have happen while the president was here. At the same time, I think it's an element of the relationship between the US and the UK. There's a lot more that goes into it as well, whether whether it be, the Prime Minister has obviously been clear about trying to get more American support for Ukraine in the war against Russia. You have a lot of the economic and business deals that have been announced over the past few days, with the idea being building on the recent trade agreement that was signed between the U.S. and the U.K. So there are like any relationship, any foreign policy relationship, there are goods and bads between two, but I think ultimately, like the strength of a relationship, I don't have any doubt about it.
On that question of support for Ukraine, Britain is one of the strongest allies of Ukraine, and like many others, have been waiting for the president to actually carry out those many threats to take some tougher measures against President Putin. We had, didn't we, that very high-profile meeting between Presidents Putin and Trump. President Trump is clearly very keen to try to find a way of ending the war, but that seems to have gone absolutely nowhere. And in the meantime, it is the European allies that have been trying to bolster security for Ukraine. Still unclear how much backing they're going to get from the United States.
Yeah, I think over the past few days, President Trump has come out arguing for stronger sanctions against Russia and for countries that import Russian energy, so like India and China and the like. But I think on the question of support for Ukraine, when it comes to the coalition of the willing and trying to get an American security guarantee in Ukraine, I think that's going to be difficult, and that is why after the press conference in D.C. between President Trump and some of the European leaders, the White House did come out afterwards and say that this is not going to happen. At the same time, I think in terms of the military and material support, I think America has shouldered a big burden on the military equipment side as Europe ramps up spending and building its own defense industrial base. We saw earlier this year with the NATO commitment to spend 5% of GDP by over the next few years, but that increasing timescale to get to 3.5%, that's beginning to bear fruit. I think ultimately Trump and the mega idea of European security by Europeans and for Europeans is beginning to become apparent, and it is putting a bit of strain on the relationship between the US and the UK as that changes, as the UK and other European countries have to become more self-sufficient in security terms.
Now, of course, almost on the eve of the president's state visit, we had the sacking of the British ambassador to Washington, Lord Mandelson, over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender, the emergence of emails showing him apparently urging Epstein to continue to fight for a lighter sentence even after he'd been convicted. Questions about Jeffrey Epstein have absolutely dogged the president, haven't they? Much to his obvious exasperation. Now, I don't think either of the two leaders will want to talk about this, but do you think that there is still the potential for embarrassment over this when it comes to certainly the questions, the news conference tomorrow afternoon?
There's always going to be a potential for, some unforeseen question and answer in a media press briefing. I think if there's one thing both the British and the American governments can agree on with the state visit is that neither of them want to talk about the resignation of Mandelson and the implication that the intertwining of that with the Epstein issue for President Trump domestically. I think both sides are looking to move on from that and not speak about it. I imagine journalists will bring it up. The key variable there will be whether or not President Trump engages and how. In my view, I don't think he's going to want to engage with it, and I don't think either will Prime Minister Starmer. So I think it'll be something that comes up, but there's always going to be that potential for embarrassment. But I think both sides are going to be trying to move on from it.
Just finally, I mean, when President Trump came to the UK during his first term in power, he met the Prime Minister of the day, Theresa May. Those two had quite a difficult relationship, didn't they? I mean, do you think that there is a real difference this time around in his second term? The president clearly has learned quite a bit from his first term in power, but he does seem to have forged this almost unlikely warm relationship with Keir Starmer, even though they're both from very different political traditions and backgrounds.
Yeah, well, they also knew each other a bit from when Starmer was shadow Brexit secretary, and there was the FTA negotiations during President Trump's first term. I think Starmer and his team, specifically folks like Lammy and his special advisors and the like, did a really good job of building out their ties and relationships in DC and in the mega world. And I think that's beginning to bear fruit. I also think, Starmer won a very large majority. President Trump likes winners. I think Starmer has also done a good job of engaging with Trump in public and in private. I think the press conference where Starmer invited President Trump to this state visit, was I would argue an excellent moment of Starmer's political career. I think he did very well, and I think those things are bearing fruit in the relationship as we're starting to see it.
Michael Martins, former political and economic specialist at the US Embassy here in the UK. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
You are listening to Carol Walker on Times Radio. The time now fast approaching at 17 minutes past 11. So the Prime Minister delayed formally announcing that he's going to recognise Palestine as a state until after President Trump has left this weekend. But the Times reports tonight that there is concern the issue could still emerge at the news conference between the two leaders at Chequers tomorrow. The news is clearly out this evening, so there's going to be no avoiding the topic. Let's talk to Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, who's a former US ambassador and a president emerita of the Middle East Council. Good evening to you, Gina.
Good evening.
We did know that the government here had declared its intention of recognising a state of Palestine. Now it seems as though that's going to come out almost the moment the president leaves. How do you think that's going to go down?
Well, it certainly will be unwelcome by President Trump and the administration. We have certainly made clear, the United States, that we do not support the UK doing that it is a gift to Hamas, that it sends the wrong signal. And so it won't be welcome, for sure. That said, there are those within the United States who will welcome it. And of course, we've seen support for Palestinians and Palestine increase in the United States, increasing criticism from members of Congress. And polls show that Israel's policies in the Gaza Strip have lowered the support for the country, and certainly for those policies, to a very low extent indeed in the United States.
We've had Marco Rubio there in the Middle East over the last few days. I mean, he has said that he doesn't think that a country like the UK, even if it does do this recognition at the UN next week in concert with a number of other countries, will make absolutely no difference on the ground. I mean, do you think he's right on that?
Well, he is right on that. It does not make a difference on the ground. It is a symbolic gesture, but symbolism absolutely counts. It will make it harder for Israel to annex the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which some in the Netanyahu government clearly want to do, and makes a statement that the international community will not accept the wiping out of a Palestinian entity, the possibility of a Palestinian state at some point in the future. So it sets some guardrails, largely symbolic, but very real nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be Britain, France, Canada and Australia and others too going to announce this decision to recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly next week. I mean, Palestine doesn't exist as a state, does it? We know that the Palestinian people in Gaza have suffered this bombardment. They're now being forced out of Gaza City. There is no government. It is very difficult indeed to really see what difference this does make. I mean, do you think that it will feed into those efforts to try to get some peaceful solution, or is this just like every other step taken by the international community, simply going to be ignored by Israel?
I think it will be technically ignored by Israel, but the reality is they have fought tooth and nail against any country extending this recognition. They know that it is important, which is why they have spoken out that they're highly critical whenever a state does it. It's why the United States is saying that it shouldn't be done, suggesting that it might be rewarding the specific group of Hamas. But of course, that is largely an excuse. There's never a time from the point of view of the government of Israel for any country to recognize a Palestinian state. The prime minister has been clear. He has fought, he says, for 17 years, even before the war in Gaza began. So we're coming on 20. He has fought against the establishment of a Palestinian state. So there's never going to be a right time. And therefore, people have to do what they believe is the right thing to do. And certainly, as we see what is widely understood to be a genocide in the Gaza Strip, and looking at the pictures coming out in the last few days of the bombardment in Gaza, it's hard to consider it anything else with the destruction of buildings, hospitals. The university has been destroyed. It's what intent can there be other than what we see happening in front of all of our eyes?
And when we saw, as we did, that strike by Israel aimed at the Hamas leadership who were in Qatar, supposedly to talk about the deal which the US put on the table, do you think that the White House, that President Trump should be doing more? I mean, he's the one country, the one leader who could put some serious pressure on President Netanyahu. Prime Minister Netanyahu, I should say, of course.
Yeah. He is one leader who could put pressure on the prime minister, but there is power to put pressure on Israel from any number of places. The Israelis absolutely understand that they are increasingly being isolated. We heard the speech from the prime minister, I think day before yesterday, saying that Israel needs to prepare to be a super Sparta, a warlike state, in a constant state of combat and surrounded in its neighborhood. That is not what Israelis strived for. They were striving for peace and acceptance in the neighborhood. And this prime minister has taken them down a very dangerous path that is not leading any place good for that country and certainly for the rest of the world. But the United States could put pressure. Europe can put pressure. Each individual state, the EU continues to have agreements, not only with the military, but broad society. We've seen with South Africa, many states can come together and do something about what is happening.